Hello and welcome to On the Ledge podcast, episode 141. And today we're root bound. In today's episode, I talked to Alice Vincent, aka Nauticulture, about her new book, Rootbound. It's a mix of memoir, botanical history and biography, and if you are somebody who has got into plants in the last few years, lots of this book will resonate strongly for you. We cover loads of ground here, from why we both love nasturtiums to all the things you can do with Sticky Willy. It's a plant. Keep it clean. And we also talk about Alice's other new project, an audiobook all about sowing seeds. Fantastic. That's coming up shortly after a tad of housekeeping. Thanks for all your lovely feedback on Diva Week. I'm glad to hear that you all enjoyed the expert advice from our clutch of growers who were so brilliant at giving you the lowdown on these plants. And I am super chuffed that people are still committing to become patrons, even at this time of difficulties financially for so many people. Chris and Darian became legends and Erica became a crazy plant person. So thank you to you trio of lovelies. And thank you to Suturbox from Belgium, who left a lovely review for On the Ledge on Apple Podcasts. Long-time listeners, or those who have binged on every episode of On the Ledge, may remember that Alice Vincent featured back in episode 14. Blimey, that was a long time ago, when I talked to her about balcony gardening. Since then, she's got a new balcony and she's changed jobs. She was writer and editor on the arts desk of The Telegraph, but now she's features editor at Penguin Books. But she's perhaps better known to the gardening world through her Instagram account Nauticulture, which also translated into a column for The Telegraph. And her book, Rootbound, Rewilding a Life, is out now. This isn't a how-to or a glossy coffee table book. No, this is an account of Alice Vincent's encounters with plants from her childhood through a rocky period in her personal life that led out the other side to a greater appreciation of the plants around her. This interview was recorded in mid-May, so if you're listening further down the line when perhaps the world is a slightly different place, then you'll forgive the references to lockdown and so on. But that's the world we're in right now, so that's what we're dealing with. And as you're listening, do check out the show notes for links to Alice's book and also details of her audiobook, Seeds from Scratch. It's really nice to have you back on the show. You were a very early guest, as I remember, talking about balcony gardening. That was a long time ago now. It's got to be 2 years ago. But you're back on the show to talk about a couple of things. But the thing I want to talk to you about first is your lovely new book, Rootbound, Rewilding a Life, which has got a super cover on it. I have to say, props on the cover, because it's very lush and leafy. And this book, I think, has caught the imagination of lots of people who, given the current insert pandemic cliche phrase here, the current situation that we're in, the unprecedented situation, has caught people's imagination. Just tell me a little bit about what the book's about and how it all came about.
Well, it certainly wasn't written with a pandemic in mind.
Well, nobody wants to launch a book right now, I guess, but you can't select that.
You can't, no. And I think if I'm certainly, of all the losses of the pandemic, a book being released in it is definitely not on that list. It came about as the kind of, it wasn't like I woke up one day and was like, I'm going to write a nature memoir. For the uninitiated, the book deals with a number of things, but it essentially examines how humans go to ground in times of traumatic events and turbulence. And I examine kind of other generations that have kind of discovered plants for themselves and in the ways in which they do it, alongside this narrative of a year of my life, in my late 20s, when the path I thought my life was taking completely veered off the tracks and kind of turned to dust, I guess. And during which I discovered gardening as a means of coping, really. And as a writer, I started to write about it, 6, 8 months, a year after the fact. And eventually it kind of appeared that actually maybe it could be a book. And plants for me have always been the plants that make themselves interesting to me are always the ones that have stories. So and that's how I learn plant names and plant facts and whatever tiny amount of botany I've got. It's from learning the origins and stories of a plant. And so it interweaves these narratives of plant stories with that of my own. And it's all about, I guess, the relative therapy that gardening and growing things gave me at a time when not else much did, really.
Now, you are classified as a millennial, and
yes.
I am not a millennial. I think I'm probably about a decade older than you. Tell me about being a millennial and plants, because there's a lot of cliches out there on the interwebs about millennials and their house plants. But as part of that generation, how does that kind of cliche make you feel? And is there a kind of way to bypass that to get to an actual nub of truth about how millennials are interacting with plants?
Such a good question. So I've had quite a lot of people generously talk to me about Rootbound, and they think the whole thing's about houseplants. And I think that might be because of the cover. It's got a very kind of botanical, indoorsy, planty cover of it. But it's not about houseplants. It's about the need for the outdoors, and it's about this constant searching for the outdoors. It nevertheless acknowledges that for many people my age, discovering houseplants was a kind of gateway to gardening more widely. And there's nothing wrong with houseplants; they're brilliant. And I think to answer your question about how those cliches help make me feel, I think it's such a limited understanding. And I definitely think there is a grain of truth. It's a trend. And I'm sure, as you've investigated on your brilliant podcast, it's a trend that's popping up for lots of reasons and is very established and brings a lot of people joy. But it's also representative of a wider need to engage with the soil, with the ground, with growing things and with nature. Because my argument that I kind of make in the book is that those born after 1980 and grew up in the subsequent years, we were the first generation to grow up with the internet. We were the first generation to grow up, to grow up without the internet, the last generation to grow up without the internet. And my childhood, which was one of being outside, was also very much one of being sit down. This is Microsoft Windows 95. This is your Game Boy. This is your first smartphone. This is MSN Messenger. We learned to do things really, really quickly, and we learned to cultivate a reliance upon instant gratification. And is it any wonder that we get to our adulthood and we're desperate to slow down? And gardening offers that opportunity to do so.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. I think your Windows 95 was probably my ZX81. Loading games on a tape player. I'm probably like the only person who's listening to this who can remember that experience. But anyway, that taught you patience. I can tell you, waiting half an hour. I can believe it. But, yes, something wonderful about that anyway. But this is not a computer games podcast. One of the things I loved in the book was your description of your interactions with plants as a child, which did ring a lot of bells for me as a child of the 70s and 80s, talking about things like sticky weed. Although I have to say, I don't know if that was sanitized for the book, but down my way, it was Sticky Willy. That plant.
It was called Sticky Willy too. It shouldn't have been sanitized. I don't know. I think that was one of the
just joking. It did make me laugh, though. That plant's got so many different common names, but sticking that on people's backs. I have to say, my son has discovered that during lockdown and absolutely loves coming home. And he really only festoons himself in it, but coming home covered in sticky weed at the end of dog walk. But also using things like dandelions and grasses. I was going to ask if children still do that, but obviously they do, because my son certainly does, and I'm sure not alone. But do we spend quite so much time, do kids these days spend quite so much time doing that kind of thing with plants? I wonder if lockdown actually has given them more opportunities to fiddle about with plants in a kind of idle way and find out lots of interesting things about them.
I really hope it has. Yeah. I mean, I live next to woodland, close enough that I can main stretch out of the woods. From the balcony, I kind of hear it. And yeah, there's a lot of kids out and about, which is nice, like really cool if that's one of the very small positive upsides of this entire endeavour. Do kids still do it? I mean, I moved to a village when I was 4, and I've lived in cities for nearly 15 years now, and I don't have any children, so I'm probably not the person to ask. but certainly that I do. If I think about my childhood, for all that I said about spending time indoors, there was also an awful lot of freedom. Like from the age of about 7 or 8, we were kind of just let to roam the village because everyone sort of knew each other, and there wasn't really that much trouble you could get into if you were probably going to one another's houses or you're going into the fields. So there was really there literally wasn't really that much stuff to play with, but we could go roaming in the countryside to our heart's content, really, which sounds terribly idyllic. It was also, by the time I got to about 13, like excruciatingly dull. So swings and roundabouts. Yeah. And actually, ironically, it was that boredom with it that pushed me so far away from nature for the next decade or so.
And did you find as an adult that some of those plants that you'd kind of forgotten about sort of came back into your view? I'm thinking about this because of what I have seen coined the term plant blindness, this idea that we're walking along and we're not really noticing the plants around us. I know, obviously, you and I both are very much alert to interesting plants around us, but lots of people aren't. Is that something that's changing and being driven by millennials, this desire to sort of experience plants, and also through your own work? You're finding people coming and going, oh, I've just started looking at the weeds in my front driveway because or my front path because of your book, and realizing that there's fascinating things out there.
I wish there were that specific examples, and that would be amazing. So I've definitely been very, very touched by the number of people who've got in touch saying you've made me notice nature more, or you've made me so much more aware of like plants and the natural world around us, which is like when you kind of write a book in all its various grisly unpleasantness, I would never have been so grand to imagine that was something that might happen as a result. And that's really so heartening. Are we noticing more? What has been really interesting in lockdown is the number of people who have been seen on social media and stuff asking for apps which can help them identify plants and birds and other bits of nature. There is a real hunger. People are suddenly really fascinated with it, because I think especially if you've only got your mile or so radius in which to walk around most days, and obviously those rules are changing in the near future, but we're still realistically going to be relatively limited on where we can go, then actually it's so much easier to notice the differences, so much easier to notice cow parsley turning up, it's so much easier to notice the hawthorn blooming because you're walking that every single day. And we are plant blind. I mean, I can't remember the statistics, there's a brilliant book released earlier this year called Losing Eden by Lucy Jones, and in it she gives the numbers of plants recognized by our generation, by that of our parents, and by that of our grandparents. And the numbers are just completely, I think millennials recognize like 10% of something that their grandparents would know the names of. So we are incredibly plant blind. I'm still very plant blind. And that's what's so shocking, is that we are at a stage when we're having to gather that information ourselves, and it's quite daunting to know where to start. That's
an interesting one about the plant apps, and I've seen the same phenomenon, and it really interests me because old school me says plant apps are not the answer. However, my son has decided to do a survey of all the spiders in our house. And cute. I was absolutely blown away when he went onto Google Lens on my phone and immediately identified accurately a species of spider using Google Lens from a very blurry photograph. And I was like, wow. And I thought, actually, this can work to spark interest, because I think if you see a spider or indeed a plant and you don't know what it is, it's kind of it can be a mystery that just remains a mystery. Whereas once you can put a name to something, you can go and study it, then that's a good thing. But what I do find though is when I ask for an ID of a plant on Twitter or something, that all the answers that come back from somebody who's using an app are always incorrect, and all the people who are the experts come back with the right answer. So I'm in two minds about these apps. I don't know how you feel.
It's a similar kind of thing. I mean, when I first started gardening, I used PlantSnap as a means of helping me to identify and grow things. But the thing is with PlantSnap is that, which is now called something else, I think, Smart Plant. It's been through a million different iterations. That those plants are diagnosed and identified by real people who are experienced at the other end. So it's not automated. I'm still a bit old school. Like I have a kind of, I'm trying to like stretch my head around the recording equipment to have a look. I've got a really old wildflower book, which is amazing because it's got photographs, not illustrations, and it has them done in chronological order through the year.
That's handy.
It's really handy. It's unfortunately it's too big to take in a pocket, but I really like that as a means of identifying things. And of course, the beauty of existing in communities like you and I do, of like Instagram and other social media, is that, you know, without being a total irritant, if I'm burning with a curiosity, I tend to text someone who I know will have the answer. But yeah, I mean, technology is a funny thing. Like most of my plant information has come from the internet. It's come from like Instagram or reading people's blogs or delving into Gardener's World forums, and books. Like books really helpful, but I don't think we can be too puritanical about this, because while people might have the wrong answer, if, as you say, if it encourages a curiosity, then they'll find the right thing out.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And hopefully, as you say, it sparks the curiosity and makes people want to go deeper. I do love all my native plant books, which are many and various. But at the same time, as you say, the immediacy of being able to plug something into an app. I mean, great when you've got an app that's got some human beings behind it as well, and get some answers, some possible answers. I think that is invaluable. Talking further about Instagram, you run the account Nauticulture. Tell me the origins of that name and what you use Instagram for.
So the name came to me, I can still remember it. I was sat on the top deck of the 68 bus. It was around, I think it was the 8th of December, 2015. I have like quite a scientific memory for certain things. Yeah.
I can't remember what I did last week. I'm so impressed.
Well, it's just certain things. My dad has this amazing ability to remember dates, so I kind of try to practice the same. And I was on the way home from one of the first Christmas parties of the season when I was an entertainment journalist, which essentially makes everything exhausting from about mid-November until actual Christmas, and you're so done. You never want a Christmas party ever again. But I was on the way back from this swish party, and I was sat on the top deck of the bus, and the windows were all steamed up, and it just appeared to me, it was like Nauticulture. And I'd been thinking of what to call this account for quite a long time. I wanted to express that I was a rank beginner. I wanted to express that it was about gardening. And I didn't at that time want to use the word gardening, because I think even in the past 5 years, gardening has had its own natural rebrand. But at that time, it was a deeply unsexy word. So I guess it's a portmanteau of horticulture and the sense of nothingness. So like having no knowledge, knowing nout, I guess. So yeah, that's where the name came from. And what do I use Instagram for? Changes all the time. Initially, I used it as a means of exploring and dipping a toe into the world of broadcasting my curiosity and affection for gardening and my nascent self-education in it. I still think it inhabits that, but what's weird is that now I use it as a means of explaining things and giving out information, which is rather the reverse. And I suppose it's also for me very much a community. I've made some genuinely really wonderful friends on it. And it's, you know, at its most basic, it's content, isn't it? Like, I put out photographs and I send, I draw attention to the things that I've written, and I like to share little videos and things. For me, it's an exploration and celebration of all the good things that come in gardening in small urban spaces, which I felt wasn't particularly well catered for.
One of the delights of your Instagram is your balcony tours. Now, we covered your balcony a little bit in the previous episode that we did, but give us a balcony update. What's been happening out there?
I think I've got a new balcony since.
Yeah, quite possibly, actually.
New balcony, yeah. So I moved from a very exposed north-facing balcony to a very sheltered west-facing balcony, which is surrounded by trees. So I'm looking at it now. It's very green and beautiful. It's also very shady, but it's growing well. The hostas are enormous. Fatsia japonica is doing its thing. I've had a bit of a shuffle around recently because I found this ladder by the bins of my estate, and it's like beautiful vintage green ladder, and I brought it back. So that's now holding all of my nasturtium seedlings, which mean that on the other side of the wall, I've got a load of hardy geraniums in troughs up on the wall. So yeah, it's growing. It's fit to burst with seedlings, like I imagine most people's growing spaces are at the moment.
Finding that ladder, oh my gosh, I'd have been so made up coming home with that. I bet you were too.
I was, but you know what? Like that, about 3 hours earlier, I'd had a row with my partner, who has moved in relatively recently, because I was just frustrated at his crap being everywhere, which isn't even fair. Like, most of his stuff is in storage. It's a bit of a temporary situation. Then lockdown happened, jokes. But anyway, I was like, there's no room for anything in this house. And then I literally snuck it in when his back was turned in the kitchen, because he was like, I thought you said there was no room for anything in this house, and you're just hauling this ladder in here.
But the ladder's saving space, right? The ladder's making space. That'd be my argument.
Exactly. I just said it's going on the balcony, and snuck it in.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah. I mean, that would have cost you 50 quid from some, fancy upcycling shop. So,
Exactly. No, I'm very pleased with it. And it's so funny, I nearly didn't rescue it. I put it on my stories being like, I'm so tempted to get this from the bins. And the good people of Instagram were like, do it. In their dozens, they were like, do it. You've got to do it.
So, good people of Instagram, can you highlight a couple of other really good Instagram accounts that we should be following? That are
my goodness, how long have you got? I don't know how many of them have been on the ledge before. I'm a huge fan of, in my head, I'm thinking right now, floral fabulosity in the form of Arthur Parkinson's account.
Oh,
chickens,
yes.
Ab-fab, tulips, what more could you want? Millie Proust is a flower grower in Sussex, and she's been giving me just visual Prozac. Ford Abbey, poetry and beautiful escapes and misty mornings down in Devon, so beautiful. Somerset, somewhere down that way, beautiful. On more practical sense, I learn something from Andrew Timothy O'Brien every single day.
Yes.
Jack Wallington's urban garden is turning Clapham into Palm Springs, and I am so here for it. And Claire Rattinen, who was an urban grower and has recently moved up to Sussex, and is, just brings me total joy and knows so much. If you're in the realm of no dig and growing edibles and things, she's your gal. All sorts of people. I follow a mix of photographers and plant people, and they normally collide in the middle.
I'll try to put links to all of those in the show notes, because there are some top recommendations there. Sometimes that's really nice. A bit of visual Prozac is what we all need. The trouble is when it goes over into just sheer jealousy and self-pity, the fact that I saw somebody this morning with an amazing Calathea orbifolia, the one with the really wide big leaves, and it was so enormous, this plant, and I just felt this rush of pure hot jealousy of this person's plant, and I was just like, control yourself, Perone. That's really sad. Just be glad for them that their Calathea is thriving. But I think that's the flip side, is it just gets dangerous. I mean, I know that lots of people I'm sure it's the same for you, lots of people blame me when they have to go out and buy more plants because they've seen me doing something or talking about something. Is it the same for you? Do people sort of say, I've just had to buy £25 worth of seeds because of your excellent guidance?
Yeah, I think that the thing that comes to mind most recently that I think I've probably inspired a sort of small rush on are this very ingenious little widget which costs 60 pence, and you screw it onto the top of a water bottle and it turns your water bottle into a rose, which is perfect for seedlings. And it's from, I'm going to send you the link so you can put it in your show notes. But I've just been watering a lot with it because I've got a lot of seedlings and it's to hand and it sits on a 2 litre water bottle. And the number of people who have just been like, I bought this because of you. And I'm like, well, cool. Like, it's not a large investment. The postage probably costs more. But yeah, no, I think that and the occasional gardening book recommendation tends to be it. People generally greening their space.
Talking of seedlings brings us neatly on to another project that you've been working on, which I believe is out either now or imminently, an audiobook. Tell me more about this audiobook.
It's a lockdown baby. It's a corona baby. It's called Seeds from Scratch, and it is a garden-long audiobook. So over the course of 4 chapters, which is around 90 minutes, if you've never sown seeds before, or if you have and you've never had much success, the plan is that you listen to it. And unfortunately, we couldn't get anyone more dulcet-toned to do it in such a short period of time, will guide you through the process of sowing your seeds and raising those seeds into a plant and what you do at each stage. So we cover pricking out, thinning out, potting on, things like light and not enough of it, and watering and legginess and that kind of stuff. And along the way, while you're doing it, I also reflect on kind of encouraging you to listen to the meditative sides of gardening, really indulging your senses and how to notice more when you garden to ultimately get, we hope, a sense of satisfaction and calm from it.
This surely has to be a hit, given the fact that seed shops are selling out amazingly fast during this pandemic. Everybody and his wife who wasn't into seed growing before has suddenly developed an interest. So hopefully this will sell really well. Can you give us a kind of a very, very potted couple of tips? Where's the first thing that people go wrong with sowing seeds?
I think that the very, very first thing is underestimating the amount of light overestimating the amount of light your space gets. So, I've done this. I've tried to grow sweet peas, of all things, on my shade garden balcony. And it's not to say that you cannot grow. There aren't annuals that will thrive in your kind of shadier conditions, because I grow them every year, and there are certain varieties which do totally put up with those conditions. But I think there's a lot of people who are like, I want to grow some edibles, I'll grow tomatoes, and they might not have enough light to get those going. So, really, and I hope the audiobook does this, really think critically about how much space light your space realistically gets, and then adjust your, because nobody wants gangly, leggy tomatoes that won't fruit. It's just such a waste of expectation and hope and everything else. And then secondly, and I'm a real stickler for this, we can always end up sowing too thickly, or rather too many seeds. That's fine, but be brutal with the thinning out. Nobody really likes to do it. It always feels a bit like killing your darlings, but much better off to do it than not. And pinching out as well. Painful in the short term, vital in the long term, I'd say. I'd
love to know why it is everyone thinks that tomatoes are the first thing they ever need to sow. Because tomatoes are really not that easy.
They're not. No.
But everyone wants to start with them. It always amazes me. And
they're also not exactly difficult to get hold of, right? If you want to, you can get a lot of delicious tomatoes, even if you want to support your local grocer and buy them in seasonally. I get that, but I don't know. I'm one of those people that if I had an allotment, I'd just grow cut flowers on it anyway. So,
and the other lie that I really want to put to rest is the idea that homegrown tomatoes always taste better, and they really don't. I think people have this idea they're going to grow homegrown tomatoes and they're going to have this amazing epiphany. There's going to be angels singing because the tomatoes are going to be so tasty. I think if you've got them growing in a greenhouse, possibly. Yes. You will get more of an intense flavour, but it's very hit and miss, I find, with outdoor tomatoes. And I think that's another big disappointment. But it's one of those things. What's a better starter seed then for somebody who's?
I don't think you can go wrong with herbs, which sounds very basic, but actually the amount of waste and air miles involved in shipping in herbs and then eating them in your house. And you always end up with either like a half-dead supermarket herb basil on your kitchen windowsill, or a kind of shriveled up, miserable bag of cut parsley in your fridge drawer. And the fact is that actually herbs like coriander, basil, parsley, I think grow really reliably. Some varieties can take a little while to germinate, but you can cut and come then again. A lot of them will be relatively hardy. I keep parsley outside all year, and I know that I'm in London and it's a bit warmer, but still. And the satisfaction of cutting your own herbs, which you can use in a whole variety of dishes, is likely to be far greater than, as you say, these tomatoes, which you nurture and nurture and nurture, and then you have a crop and most of them are green and some of them aren't that tasty. I'd also say salad leaves as well. You can grow so many really interesting salad crops. Mitsunas, mustards, pea shoots, which are so fresh. I mean, when I work outside on the balcony, I just end up eating most of my pea shoot crop just idly while tapping emails, because they're like sweets. They're so yummy and sweet and gorgeous. So yeah, I'd say stick to the leafy greens, and just because you'll get so much from them and you'll be able to eat them with everything.
Yeah, I think that's a really good advice. I just love just chucking a few coriander seeds just from a big bag from the supermarket, and they just grow. I mean, and you've got this wonderful crop. I mean, I just had one particularly good crop last winter, I think it was. And I just remember picking them, and I was just the smuggest person alive, because I literally had bagfuls of this fresh coriander.
Yes.
I know not everyone likes coriander, but it was so good. And I normally have a reasonable amount, but that year it just felt so abundant, and I felt so Lady Bountiful giving away these bags of coriander to people.
And it smells so good.
Oh, it's amazing. I know some people find it soapy and horrible, but I just love coriander. That's very, very true. Well, I hope that the audiobook sells well. How can we get hold of it?
So I believe it's going to be available through iTunes, and if you're an Audible customer, I think you can get it through there as well. And seeds from scratch. And I will be definitely shouting about it online. So if you want to join in, we are sharing photos of your seed sowing station and you sowing seeds. So stick them up and tag me in hashtag seeds from scratch, and that would be fun as well.
Awesome. Much as I do love sowing seeds, but I am also a big proponent of the perennial vegetable. And
yes.
I think that is another area that is just ripe for people who are getting into vegetables to get into. I mean, I feel like I'm some kind of crazy tent evangelist about these plants. Have you ever tried any perennial vegetables?
I've not, because the thing is, like, on this space that I'm on, most of the plants on the balcony are perennials. I'm a huge perennial fan, like in terms of design, in terms of growing them. I love it, but there's not a lot of space and there's not a lot of light, which means growing edibles is a bit of a challenge. And certainly giving over space to them for the course of a whole year is, you've got to be a top plant to earn that level of space on the balcony. Yeah,
I hear you.
But they are amazing. And like, I know people, I think people don't even know that you can get perennial vegetables. And of course you can. So you're wise to preach about it.
Yeah. I think it's, as I say, it's my ongoing mission to convert people to the mission. The other flower, is there any particular flower? You talked about sweet peas. Is there any other flower that is really your number one thing to try growing from seed?
I quite like growing cosmos from seed, but actually beyond that, nasturtiums are probably the number one.
Oh, yes.
And they're what I've got growing at the moment. And because of lockdown and the aforementioned challenges of getting seeds, I've actually been able to buy nasturtium seeds in quite a variety in the supermarket. So I've sown so many of them, and the ladder is going to be a kind of tower of nasturtiums later on this summer, I hope. And I love them because not only are they entirely edible, so you can eat them, but they're just, to me, they're really easy. They're a great one to grow with children because the seed's quite big, so they're good for little hands. And they will grow in incredibly poor soil. If you don't have any compost, you could literally do it in the scraping, the sweepings of your patio, I'd imagine. And if you don't water them too much, they only flower more. Like, they're kind of brilliant. For me, they always really remind me of holidays. And so I'm a nasturtium fan, I'd say.
I'm with you. I'm totally with you. I love the idea of a nasturtium tower on the ladder. That sounds amazing. Yeah, they are amazing plants. There's so many different things you can do with them, and they're so tolerant of different conditions, whether they're in full sun or shade. Yeah, they're fantastic. And I'm just looking at the other thing that I absolutely love. Now, perhaps you don't have enough sun for this on your balcony, but English marigolds, pot marigolds.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yes.
I never sow any. They just self-sow in my vegetable patch, and they're just so, they give me so much joy at the minute. They're just so ridiculously bright orange.
Yeah, and if you're into like herbalism, or you want to start with a bit of herbalism and different medicinal uses for plants, then obviously marigolds, calendula they've got all sorts of uses. I had a packet of calendula seeds, and I actually sent them to a friend. So I'm going to have to track down some more, maybe when the garden centre's open, and get on with that, because you're right, they're brilliant. They're so cheery. And zinnia as well are another example. We're just about getting into zinnia sowing time, I'd say. And very cheery, very bright. Which is, when it's like one of those slightly chilly spring days, you're like, can I handle the luminosity? And it's like, yes, you can. Wait a few months. You'll want it.
I've got a book recommendation for you. Have you come across the book called Vickery's Folk Flora?
No, that sounds amazing.
Love this book. You might love this book. It is I've just got it here. It is an A to Z of the folklore and uses of British and Irish plants. So basically, this guy has collected over many decades all the different common names and stories behind British plants. And it's such a good book. It's really, really good. And I'm just looking up some of the names of Calendula officinalis, or marigold. Apparently they call it merry-go-rounds in Dorset, nobody's flower in Wiltshire, and Mary Gowland in Northumberland. So there we go.
Brilliant.
And apparently it was used to treat measles.
There you go.
It's a really interesting book. Yes, I'll put it up. I'll put it up on my Insta. It's a really great book, actually. And I thought it might be one that you might enjoy.
Yeah, that sounds right up my street. Thank you.
It is. It's a massive tome, though. It's not one you're going to be sort of wandering around with, because it's huge. It's like a brick, but it's great.
It sits next to More of Greaves and Modern Herbal, the two slightly, like 70s tomes for bed night reading. Yeah,
exactly. Well, it's lovely to talk to you, Alice, and I'm so delighted to have been able to chat to you about Rootbound, which is a fantastic book. I will put details of that in the show notes. That's out now, and I would say in all good bookshops, but unfortunately at the moment, as we speak, not quite.
No.
But hopefully soon. And is there an ebook? Is there all those kind of good things of that?
I mean, I always, please support independent bookshops, especially now. Otherwise, Waterstones 5, all good. But if you want it on Kindle, it's currently stupidly reasonable on Kindle. It's like £2.70 or something on Kindle. And audiobook is not that cheap, but it is read so beautifully by an actress called Fiona Hampton, and she does such a gorgeous job. So yeah, audio, ebook, physical copies, all in existence.
Brilliant. Well, good luck with that, and I hope the Seeds audiobook also does really, really well.
Thank you.
And any more future pandemic plans, or is it all up in the air?
It's it's been a busy few weeks, and I've just sort of stopped and taken a breather. So hopefully continuing with the original lockdown plan, which is getting my head into a few books and brewing up something new.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to see what that is. And thank you very much for joining me, Alice.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you to today's guest, Alice Vincent. I'll be back next Friday with more planty goodness. Until then, have a great week. Bye. music you heard in this episode was Roll Jordan Roll by the Joy Drops and The Encouragement Stick by Dr. Turtle. Both tracks are licensed under Creative Commons. See the show notes at janeperrone.com for details.